welcome to 2016 election coverage, and we're covering the city council races, and today we have Cara Kaser, who's going to be running for Ward 1. And that is an open seat because the current city council member is moving up to mayor.
Yeah.
Or he's running for mayor anyway. So, Cara, what got you interested in running for this seat?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. What got me running for the ward is Chuck Bennett was running for mayor, so it's going to be an open seat on the council, and I felt that I'm in a really good place in my life to do this, both because of the experience I've had serving on the Grant Neighborhood Association and also the Historic Landmarks Commission, the Central Salem Mobility Study, and other volunteer things I've done for the city. I've already been really involved in those things. And then professionally, I'm in a good spot too. And I felt like everything just kind of aligned for me to feel really confident and good about running. I also wanted to run because I really want to work for the people in my ward, and felt that with Chuck kind of moving on in one way or another out of the seat, that the ward really needs someone who understands the issues going on in the ward, who comes from that neighborhood perspective, and can go on the council and bring all that experience to the seat. So when I found out he wasn't running, I thought this is a great opportunity because Chuck's the incumbent. It's always more difficult to run against an incumbent than an open seat, and felt like this was a good timing for me personally, and also for the ward.
And you've had experience working in your neighborhood association and these various other activities that you've been doing. Kind of gives you a feel of what is needed at the city level. Because even though you're representing this particular ward, most of the issues are citywide. They're not.
Yeah. So I felt like serving on the Grant Neighborhood Association, it gives you the exposure to those neighborhood level issues. But through that, you get exposed to those citywide issues, because all of the neighborhood associations are essentially grappling with the same type of issues. And sometimes they're more localized to a neighborhood, one neighborhood over another. But on the whole, we're kind of dealing with the same type of thing. So I feel like you can extrapolate your experience from that local level or neighborhood level up to the council. And I feel like that's having that experience come from the neighborhood. I can do that, and have kind of already been doing that in the Grant Neighborhood Association capacity, because I've gone to the council and spoke about topics that are of citywide interest that aren't necessarily in Ward 1 or in the neighborhood, but that the neighborhood still cares about, and they've kind of, we've drafted letters or comments, and they want to send somebody, and I've always been like, well, send me. I want to do that. I want to share our neighborhood perspective on that issue. So even though we are a neighborhood association, we do still speak to citywide issues.
So some of the issues that I'd like to explore are, to start with anyway, are the infrastructure questions that are coming up. And that's the Salem Police Facility and the third bridge. So where do you stand on those two topics?
For the police facility, it's a needed facility. My feeling on it right now is that the right location has been chosen, which is the old O'Brien dealership at that very funky intersection of Commercial, Liberty, and Division. And so I feel like the location has been settled, and it's the correct one because of the community came out at that public hearing and really said, hey, this is where it needs to be located. And not a single person said otherwise. They
didn't want the other side at all.
Yeah, they didn't want the other side at all. It was unanimous, which was kind of amazing, actually, when you think about public commenting in Salem for one thing to be kind of a unanimous decision about a location. In terms of the other aspects of the facility and the planning for it, I want to make sure that the facility is right for us, that it's the right size and the right cost for us. I haven't heard anyone saying we don't need a police facility, it's fine.
Well, there are some folks that are.
Sure, but I would say the majority of people I've heard from have said, the police need they need a facility, or they need a larger space, at least.
And one that's earthquake safe.
And one that's earthquake proof and seismically ready, so that when that happens, they're not buried under rubble and all of that. I think where there's disagreement right now is in the cost, the size, and then the cost, because that goes along with the size. I find it interesting that the police facility task force came out with a recommendation of one size, which was between 75,000 and 106,000 square feet, based on the needs assessment done and them talking with experts. And then the consulting firm that the city ultimately went with has come back with a fairly substantially more facility size. I believe it's 145,000.
148,000 was their recommendation.
Yeah.
And then somebody said, well, why don't we round it off and make
to
it 150?
So I'm interested about why they're coming back with a recommendation that's 40 to 50% more than the task force recommended initially. So I think the city could just do a much better job of communicating with the public about what's happened between the task force ending and the consulting group coming out with the recommendation, and how they arrived at those numbers. Because I don't think the communication has been necessarily great, and that there's perhaps not the information out there for people to really look at it and come to their own conclusions about how they feel about it. I think there's just a couple of these numbers hanging out, and there's no meaning behind what those things are. So I hope, and I hope the city does a better public education campaign around this. As far as the financing of it, I'm concerned about potentially an $80 million bond going forward. I'm concerned that it might not pass. And I'm concerned also that initially there was conversation about having the police facility built and seismic retrofitting done of the civic center and library, and that seems to be off the table now, and they're just focusing on the police facility. Although very recently, in the last couple of days, I've heard that maybe that's coming back. I'm not sure yet.
One of the things, because I attended some of the police facility meetings, is that they were under the impression that people, if they had two ballot measures, one for the civic center and the library, and one for the police facility, they were kind of concerned that the police facility would get voted down and the library and city hall would be voted in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a concern of theirs. And I can understand that. But to me, it's like, why do you want to have them in separate ballot measures?
Instead of rolling them all together in one.
Yeah, people can count.
Right.
They can add.
Sure.
They know how much it's going to cost to do both of them. And I think with doing just the police facility, you're creating a situation where what is going to happen with City Hall, there's your staff right there, and the library, which a lot of people go to. I mean, and I think at the open hearing, when people were getting up, somebody was saying, how come there isn't a sign on the library saying, this building's unsafe? And
I remember that woman saying she went there with her daughter, I think, and was surprised when she found out that it wasn't seismically retrofitted. And she had lived in California before, and they had these notices on their buildings saying, this building's not seismically retrofitted. And I think the outcome of that was she said, I'm going to think twice about going to the library.
Right.
And that's not what we want. We don't want people thinking twice about whether or not
City Hall.
should I go into this public building or not to do what I need to do because I'm worried about an earthquake happening in it and getting killed in it or hurt. And I think that's a problem. I think that there's somewhat of a liability issue too with the city, with their public buildings, and knowing that they're not seismically retrofitted. That when the hazard study was done, I forget when it was done exactly, but 2012, 13, and it said right in there that the city of Salem buildings, the majority will fail in a Cascadia type earthquake. And I think that should be a wake-up call to both the city and the public that our buildings, our public buildings, we need to do something because they're going to fail an earthquake, and it's going to kill people. And so I'm surprised there hasn't been more conversation around it really until now. Because we've known this for a long time. I think it's just in the last couple of years it's really come to the forefront, and especially with the article in the New York Times and the OPB series and coverage of things. But even when the Japanese earthquake and tsunami hit, what was that, 5 years ago?
5 years.
Yeah, I mean, we still are kind of like, well, it happened to Japan. That's really far away.
Well,
but it's
we
going.
still have some of their boats showing up at our beaches.
Yeah. And it will happen here, and it's just a matter of when it will happen, and we need to be prepared. And I mean, personally, I think about it quite often, I have to admit, and I think about being at the city council meetings, and with what if it happened? What would I do? I know this building isn't safe. How would I get out? Is there a plan to get out?
Well, where the city council chambers are, I think, is particularly a problem because it's on pillars.
It sits up on the pillars. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be the first thing that goes down.
Yeah.
And
some people might cheer that, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, the thing is that's where the city does its business. And like, I've been over there where people are trying to get building permits, various licenses that pay their bills and like that. So at any one particular time, you not only have the city staff in there, but you have a fair amount of public in there as well. So it is a major issue. And in the library, you have tons of people coming in. I mean, think about when they're having their book sale here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of people down in the basement.
Yeah, and the library, they're trying to always get more people to use it too, and by offering programs for, there's adults, but also children and teens, and they're trying to hit all their demographics. So I feel like we need to make a concerted effort to start to really think about, we need to make these buildings safer, and we need to have a plan to make that happen. So going back to the police facility, right now, from what I've read and seen and heard, it doesn't sound like there's going to be two ballot measures going on at the same time, or a combined one, or anything. It sounds like the focus is just on the police facility. Not sure if that's the best approach, because it seems a little bit like maybe we have kind of tunnel vision going into that, where we could, I believe our voters, they can educate themselves enough to know that two ballot measures supporting two different things. So I don't know if it's going to be palatable to people to just vote on the police facility.
Well, they're going to have to, the city is going to have to put out some information to say why this is important and why it's important to get started now.
Because my concern would be, we passed the bond for the police facility, we passed the $80 million bond, and then the next general election comes around and there's a bond for seismic now for City Hall, and now people are bond weary and they would be less likely to vote for that. Or they might feel, well, we just voted on this police facility and that's supposed to solve a large chunk of our problems, so we don't see an issue. So I guess that would be my concern with it. So
what about the third bridge?
The third bridge, I wish that it's such a complicated thing now. It's been going on for 10 years, the actual conversation about this third bridge, and something that's been talked about for 50 years now. I think there is a lot of public opposition to the third bridge, and I feel that the city leadership has not been necessarily hearing that or listening to that.
Listening might be the key word there.
Right, listening to the people that are saying that. And it's kind of a, I don't know how to describe it quite, but it's almost like the city feels, or the leadership feels, that there's a fringe group of people that are the outspoken minority. But I have talked with, now through my campaigning, hundreds of people, I think, by this point. And I have maybe met just a handful, and I'm talking about maybe 10, that actually want a third bridge or think it's a good idea. And these people are all in Ward 1, because I'm talking with voters in Ward 1. So if the majority of people, the vast majority of people I'm talking to, think that it's not a good idea, I don't think it's just a vocal minority that's saying we shouldn't do this. I think, I don't want to quote Nixon or anything, but that silent majority I think is out there, and I think that we have. The vocal people who are putting forth information. They have websites and social media and all that. And then on the other side of that, we have the supporters who are doing the exact same thing. And in the squishy middle is kind of everybody else. And that squishy middle is where I've been talking with people. And I feel like the majority of those people don't want it either. And that's for a number of reasons. In Highland neighborhood, it's because they're worried about Highland. They're worried about the impacts of a bridge to Highland and kind of creating what Councilor Dickey called the cloud of uncertainty, that when it's kind of finalized and there's a plan in place and an actual footprint, that that property will be bought and then it'll sit and people won't want to invest in Highland because of that happening. On the west side, I think it's similar. People are worried about being in the path of not only the bridge, but proposed Marine Drive and the off-ramps and things that go along there. People are very concerned about the cost of the bridge. I think it's at $420 million is the last estimate that I saw. And they're worried about how we're going to pay for, a $420 million bridge. And especially when they don't feel that there's a need. I don't think anyone would disagree that during the rush hour, traffic is congested at the bridge, both along Marion Street and Wallace Road. I've been in that. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. I think the planning for infrastructure around an hour a day is a problem.
Especially at that cost.
Especially at that cost. And I always think about, what if we took a fraction of that cost and we invested in public transportation, or we invested into improved pedestrian bicycle infrastructure? Because I feel like we could remove a lot of traffic that way. And it's actually in the city's planning documents that their highest priority would be investing in public transit and things to remove congestion from the roads, because adding capacity to roads does not eliminate traffic. And that has, I think now,
study after study has shown that.
Study after study has shown that, and what do we always look at? We're going to add capacity. Well, it's not going to solve the problem. It was interesting today, was reading the Breakfast on Bikes blog, and the author there took data from the third bridge, the study, the Salem River Crossing Project study, and plotted it on a graph with tolls. And that person said, what if we told the current bridges right now, what if we told them $1? And according to data collected by the study, traffic would decrease. And you could actually solve our capacity problem, our traffic problem, by tolling the bridge. I believe it was at $3. So if you told the current bridges at $3, you would remove enough traffic, because enough people would not drive across the bridge. You would eliminate the problem. So I think that the bridge is a bit of a manifest destiny type of thinking, where the city and our leaders have been talking about this for 50 years. We should do something. And I don't feel that that's the right approach, because things that were done in the 60s to Salem, there were some horrible things done to Salem in terms of planning in the 60s. The urban renewal in the Hollywood district, the now gutted Hollywood district, is just one example of that. So I don't think we should necessarily say, well, because our forefathers, with you will, wanted to do this, that we should do it. So at this point, I feel like nothing's really happened in the last year. They're still working on the final environmental impact statement, and it's not supposed to be completed, I believe, until next summer, 2017. We're paying so many $1,000s a month to keep it going. There hasn't been great public support of this. I feel like it's a project that we should probably shelve at this point.
Well, you certainly went into a lot of detail
Sorry.
on that. Well, no, that's good. That's good because I think sometimes people don't realize the depth of some of these issues. Now, what about one of the things that kind of concerns me also is the homeless and affordable housing issue that we have here in Salem.
Mm-hmm.
A number of people get vouchers for like Section 8 housing and like that, but they have to turn the vouchers back in because there isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
We're about a 6,000 units plus deficit for affordable housing. And then you have the homeless situation where people don't even have
Mm-hmm.
a home to, or a shelter of any kind usually.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you see as the problem and what could possibly fix this problem?
I see I guess the underpinnings of the problem of being not quite clear actually. People need housing, so you do have that population that just doesn't have a house and they're homeless. And I was looking at the homeless study a couple of days ago, and it listed a variety of reasons for why. And there's different levels of, well, I know you know this, but there's different levels of homelessness. There's the people who are, homeless maybe for a month, and then there's people of 3 months, 6 months, and you have kind of the chronically homeless, somebody who's been homeless for more than a year, or is kind of in housing and then loses, and in housing and not.
Or is sleeping on couches of friends.
Right, or is couch surfing, is staying with a friend or a relative, staying in their car if they have a car. I mean, there's so many different forms, people. And then, kind of alongside that is you have people who are homeless and now they have addiction issues, they have mental health needs. So it's, homelessness is not a unified thing at all. It's a very complicated problem. And I think, it's good to be able to try to understand the underpinnings of why that happens. I think we shouldn't spend all of our time, though. And I think we've done that already. We want to understand why, because we feel like if we understand why, then we can solve the problem. And I think we've been focusing our issues on, we've been focusing on trying to understand it so much that we don't do anything.
And that's kind of the key, is doing something.
Right, and doing something. So I initially was optimistic about the Mid-Willamette Valley Homeless Initiative Task Force. But when I saw the roster of people, and they all have good intentions, I know that, I just felt that the homeless community was missing from that conversation. Because there wasn't anyone on that task force in particular that was experiencing homelessness.
Or had experience.
Or maybe had, and I'm not sure. I don't know everybody's background on that, but yeah, it's probably safe to say they probably haven't. And I feel like if we're really going to be able to figure out a way to deal with homelessness, that we need to talk with the people who are experiencing homelessness. And we need to invite them to the conversation, because they're the people on the ground, literally, in some aspects, some respects. But they are also witnessing it day in and day out. I went to the task force today. They had a meeting. And one of the things that struck me was it's at Kaser City Hall. Well, Kaser City Hall from downtown is about 4-ish miles away. And I thought, if I was homeless, living kind of downtown, would I go to that meeting? Would I want to walk 4 miles or try to catch a bus or spend money to try to get there to attend?
Well, that might be the case. They don't have enough money to go down there.
Right.
Plus, usually, if you're homeless, that means you got to take your belongings with you.
Because you can't leave them anywhere. There's no security for your things.
So that would be quite a trek.
So I kind of felt like holding it at Kaser, even though it seems simple, and it might seem like I'm nitpicking, but it makes a difference. And it makes a difference to the public where these meetings are held and who can attend and what time of day. It was held at 4 o'clock. What people get off work at 3:30 so they can go attend a meeting. I think there's just very small considerations that we could make that it could say a lot, even just as a extension of goodwill, of we're going to really try to involve everybody and as many people as possible. And but back to the larger issue of homelessness, I would like to understand better why we don't have more affordable housing, why we don't have low-cost housing, and what the barriers are to that happening. I heard a little bit today at the task force from a couple of developers, and they were pointing to things such as building code is too inflexible for affordable or low-cost housing to happen or to be profitable to a developer. And then there were other things that came up, like the SDC charges are too much for affordable housing and all of that. I would like to better understand, what's the carrot? What can we provide to somebody to put in low-cost housing? And we don't want our developers to, not make money because it's what they're doing. But I think we have to look at, what's the margin there? And if you're building low-cost housing, should you be making a lot of money off of that, or
maybe have a mixed housing?
Or right.
So if the city is sponsoring someone building, like converting the Boise Cascade site, they could have insisted on having low-cost housing as part of the mix.
Right. Yeah, within that development, especially since we're subsidizing that development happening, and we should have some say in what kind of housing is available there, because I know from my reading and talking with people that there's very expensive housing being built right now.
Yes.
It's not affordable to people who are on limited incomes, or people who are making less than the $46,000 that the average person in Salem's making. So I would like to look at those, whatever those barriers are, and if it's something that the city could help with. So say it's a process. So there was something I heard about today, the PUDs, the planned unit developments. So you're looking at criteria that would increase density of a piece of land. So you could have single-family houses closer together, smaller, not meeting some of the setback requirements and things like that.
Kind of like the downtown and midtown areas.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's a planned development essentially. This process, and I don't know because I haven't fact-checked this, but it sounds like it takes a while to kind of move through that. And I'm very process-oriented, and I feel like we could figure out our process, and the process will help. It'll help accomplish the right goal, as long as we make that process to do that. We make it simpler or more transparent or whatever needs to happen. So if we want more kind of high density places going in that you could build for less because they're smaller units, you're not using as much land for that, then if we agree on, yes, that's the right thing, that's what we want, then we should make that process very easy for people to go through. And if it is a kind of an involved process and it's taking years to get there, then maybe that's not the best process to have.
Well, Cara, it's been very informative. We're out of time.
Oh.
So I really want to thank you for coming in and sharing your vision of what the city of Salem should look like. And I can't thank you enough for going into kind of depth about some of these issues. So thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
And come back next time.